Let's welcome Dr. Fairbanks. Glad to have you.
Well, I bring you greetings from wet and weary Florida. The theme of our session today is local church boards. And I've entitled the presentation today, 5 Non-Negotiables for Local Church Board Health. I must confess to you that I am a board hugger. I get different reactions when I say that. I wrote a blog by that title on my website January of 2015. Received some interesting comments, both from the blog and afterwards from friends of mine. But I'll tell you in a moment why I really am that board hugger. But to tell you up front, I come to you as a brother in Christ. I come to you as one who's still on the journey with you. I come to you as one who would like to perhaps reduce some stress that we sometimes have when we even refer to our boards, the boards with whom we work. I'd like to provide some resources, both that I've developed over the years, but also from the Resource Center here at SNU. And I would, instead of providing a stress reducer for you, like this stress ball, when the word boards are mentioned, to help you gain the breath you need, the deep breaths you need, rather, I hope to give you some insights and some resources that will help reduce that stress. And in fact, strengthen you and support you in your working with the boards. Working with boards, make sure I'm together with. Thank you. Several years ago, I came across the quote that perhaps you've read before. It's very important quote by Theodore Roosevelt. He gave this quote in 2010 in Paris, and a section of it caught my attention and others for sure. But let me read it to you, and it tells you why I think, and it will help you understand why I identify myself as a board hugger. It is not the critic who counts, Roosevelt says, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. In my work with the school boards associated with International Board of Education, Church of the Nazarene, especially those boards outside the United States. We have 52 schools and extension centers in about 120 countries. And the working with many of those school presidents and boards, I remember early on walking away from those board meetings, working with their school principal or vice chancellor or president or director, according to the nomenclature of that country. I remember being especially impressed with the quality of the lay leadership appointed or elected to those boards. They had something to contribute. They loved the Lord. They loved that school. They had something to contribute and wanted to contribute. But I found several things about those lay leaders. They were also extremely frustrated. Frustration was at several levels. They, on the one hand, would come to board meetings, sometimes at their own expense, and they would not be able really to say a word. The decisions had really been made by others, and what they wanted was just the full board to rubber stamp what had already been decided. The other extreme was when they'd come to board meetings, different schools perhaps, but they would see that the agenda was so unorganized that it would take half the meeting to get structured in such a way that they could proceed with the meeting. The third observation was that they'd really not been trained or shaped or told or helped in understanding what the role, the function of the board really is. And it was out of that working with those boards in various places that I really wanted to strengthen the hand, if I may say it like that, of those lay leaders. And the book Best Practices for Effective Boards was then developed and shaped and co-written by Dwight Gunter, senior pastor of Trevecca Community Church, Dr. Jim Kokenauer, great lay leader and a director of a number of compassionate ministry centers, board chair at Mount Vernon for many years with me and myself. The reason I like this quote is that phrase, people in the arena. And I look at board members in many of our churches, on our school boards. There are some exceptions to what I'm going to say, but I've chosen to believe that they're there because they believe in the church. They believe in the school. They believe in that ministry organization on which board they serve. Their hearts are right. And many of them have something to contribute. They want to contribute. They really want to contribute. But they feel like for various reasons they cannot, they have not, but they've chosen not to stand on the sidelines and criticize. They are in the arena with you and with us, and I've come to embrace that. I know there are exceptions. I know there are people who are there for other reasons, but I choose to believe, and this is the mindset I have with our board in Tampa First. I choose to believe that they are there because they love the church and want, because they've been elected or selected, to give their best while they're there. And I want to come alongside and help them and nurture them. There's two working assumptions that are important to me, and I hope by the end of this session will mean more to you than now. I think conceptually we can embrace it. I hope we will have some insights on how it happens more and more. Strong boards empower missional and visional leaders, and strong leaders embrace passionate and engaged boards. That can be just a statement. I can tell you I didn't read it someplace. Out of my own experience, I tried to shape that statement because both dimensions are important. Strong boards at whatever level, local church level, a ministry organization level, a college university level. Strong boards empower, key word, missional and visional leaders. But likewise, strong leaders, you, me, in various assignments. Strong leaders embrace passionate and engaged boards. When one is weak, when one intimidates the other, when one is fearful of the other, something happens. Someone or some school or some church suffers. Pastor, local church. When a strong board micromanages the pastor or school leader, ministry organization leader, something is missing, and someone and something suffers, some institution suffers. When there's a strong pastor or school leader who really has on his or her board those individuals who are yes people, likewise there are problems. It's when that belief that in the midst of having strong leaders and strong boards, that good will come through that. that we really embrace this assumption and embrace this concept. The other assumption that is important is that board development, thank you. Board development is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing, intentional process, not a one-time event, even a one-time forum or one-time session like this. Hopefully you've been thinking about board development before this session today. And hopefully this session today will stimulate your thoughts and discussion with your friends around you back home. But this is just one of other events that are needed in an ongoing intentional process to strengthen both you as the leader of the board and your board, the board on which you served. It is an intentional, ongoing process. I think that's why we have resources here like the Resource Center at SNU. This PowerPoint presentation will be available to you through the Resource Center. It'll be on my website, and I'll share how to access that website in a few minutes. But resources to help you in an intentional, ongoing manner. And I think people are frustrated when we take something from a workshop like this, we go back, we try to implement it, and it doesn't go over as much as we want, and we kind of give up and we back off. But it's an intentional, ongoing, and then complicated in our situations where some of our boards change, and some change regularly every year. And it's why that ongoing, intentional orientation and board development sessions are necessary and plugged in. Well, let me start by asking you one or maybe two questions. Take a moment, if you will, and think about this question. And you may come to this forum thinking that, yes, the theme is on a subject that's important to me. It better be important to me, you say. But whatever else is said by that speaker, whom you may know or may not know, whatever else is said by the speaker, I'd like this issue addressed sometime during the forum. What is that question, or what is that issue? Would you take a moment and write it down? I started to say, speak to someone next to you and tell them what that is. I think it'd be better just for you to write it down. Write down that issue, that whatever else is discussed today, you'd like that particular issue discussed. And you can send that to our center here, and at break time I'll look over those questions. And if I don't see where those answers can be given in this forum, I promise you I will respond to your email, if your email address, and it will be a part of your question. Sometime in the near future, I would like to follow through, and I'd like to respond to your questions, and I will do that. But what one very big question? It may be just to your church specifically and not related to others here. That's okay. What one very big board question would you like to see addressed today? If not today, in correspondence by telephone or by email or texting with me, I promise to follow through. There's a corollary question, separate though from the first. What is the critical issue, the most critical issue facing your board? I like to ask boards this question. I like to ask leaders of boards this question because it tells me where they're thinking, even what they really consider to be the big issues. And sometimes the issues that we feel are the critical issues really are part of a much larger issue. But I like to have a knowledge or understanding of the issues that you are facing. I'd be interested in your responses to these two initial questions. Well, let me move to the 5 initial questions that, excuse me, thank you. Let me move to the 5 non-negotiables, as I refer to them, for local church board health. When I read through this, you may say, well, yeah, I could be up there talking about these, and you could, I'm sure. But I hope you'll understand my perspective and something of what I can bring to this discussion by the end of our forum, because I think when we talk about local church board health, the first non-negotiable is to really know the basics. Know the basics. What is the role? What is the purpose? What is the function of the board? Amazing, both at a local church level and particularly at a school level, at various levels. In ministry organizations, they want to make a contribution. They can, but they're really not for sure what the purpose of the board is. Know the basics. The second non-negotiable, as I reference it, is to ask the right questions. Not just any questions, but the right questions. We're going to talk about that at length this morning. The third non-negotiable is to communicate in conflict situations with civility. Communicate in conflict situations with civility. Number 4, to embrace assessment and development in planning. Embrace assessment and development in planning. And number 5, nurture emerging leaders for the church board. Truth is, there may be more than 5, there may be less than 5 non-negotiables. For the time that we have together, I thought I could at least talk about these 5, and I think at least these 5, from my perspective. You can call them non-negotiables, you can call them essentials, choose the word you use, but they're important to us, for sure. And so let's walk through that for a moment. When you look at this life span and stages of a faith community chart, and this chart is not for sure unique to me. It's Bullard in his work has variations of the life stages of a local church. I first saw this particular chart in Australia a couple of years ago and tried to find out its source, and because I reference it in my new book, and the best I could find, it goes back to Robert Dale's book, 1981, on To Dream Again, and it's gone through variations of that, and so that's the way I reference this as a footnote in the text. But I like this because whether it's a new business whether it's a new business, thank you, whether it's a new business or a new church, there is that startup, and with a startup, you notice there are capital letters here. Those capital letters represent the characteristics of faith communities, such as vision, community, program, and management. And with a new start in a local church or in a business, there is that passion, there's vision, it drives us. A few people do a lot. Everything's required, but it takes hold at some time in the future. And then community is developed, and participation, relationships become increasingly important. And with growth comes programming for children, for youth, for adults, whatever. We add those programs, and then we understand the importance of managing all that we're doing. And we feel like finally we're moving, and the temptation at this point is really to think, wow, we need to continue doing exactly what we've been doing because look how far we've come. And that's a danger point, because at some point, and you probably experienced at some point in your past, that there comes a flat lining where you do more and more and more of the same, but you're not getting the same results. More and more, and you're just seemingly spinning the wheels. And if there is not a new vision or a new initiative or some significant breakthrough in the life of that business or organization, let's stay focused on churches here, then something happens. It moves into a declining stage where really the first thing is lost is the vision. And then from that community and program, and then death in maintenance. I had a board retreat at Tampa First Church in March of this year. And among other things, the board retreat was actually focused around big questions. We're going to talk about some of those questions in just a few moments. But I went through this lifespan and stages chart, and I asked the board members, where are we as a church on this scale? And I said, let me pause a moment and say, I think when the church relocated from where it was in a crowded corner facility, non-air conditioned, Tampa, Florida, non-air conditioned, no parking lot, when they relocated from there to where they are presently, and it's about 35 years ago, by the time, Stan, you were there. You called to go there. I mean, I know the history of that church wanting you. But it had new life. It had new vision. It had new reason. But that was 35 years ago. So I was asking the board, where are we as a church now? Anywhere on this? And almost to the person they were on, somewhere on this slide down. I'm not going to tell you where one board member said we were, because it would be lower down than you'd want it to be. But all on this downward slide. And what I said was, the further down we are on this slide, the more intense turnaround is required. The more intense the turnaround. And I referred to a book entitled Deep Change, where that book refers to the deep change or slow death dilemma. And I said, if we are in fact moving down this slide, what deep change do you think is required for us to make that turnaround and to bring forth? And it's why I think as much as we as leaders want to have vision, we'll talk about that a little later, the importance of bringing the board even in our discussion at this point, so very important. It is true that organizations evolve and change, and so must our governing boards. Organizations change. We grow. We mature. Even not just change in personnel, but we grow. And with that growth of our organization, of our church, of our business, whatever we're involved in. But here with churches, I'm amazed at the number of local churches still functioning really as a committee of a whole. And yet we could really deal with the big issues of the church if we structured the board differently, and working in a measure to do that with them. But let's move on to the first basic of the non-negotiable, and that is this. First, non-negotiable, know the basics. Understand the essentials of the board's role, the purpose, and functions. I refer to it as head in, fingers out. Well, what do I mean by that? I think you understand the basics, knowing the role, the function, and the purpose. In our book, we talk about the best practice being heads in and fingers out. And this is tricky, and it is not easily grasped or embraced by local church boards because we have such a tradition otherwise. Here's the concept. Well, the concept is, on Tuesday night, the people who are at our board meeting as board members, they are really the same individuals who were in church on Sunday morning worshiping with us, right? Yes. And they may be the same people who will be with us on Saturday in a work day, actually implementing some of the programs or plans the board made earlier on. So the same person can worship, work, but in board meetings, it's heads in, fingers out. By that I mean board members in that role as a board and their role as board members in a board meeting, board members are engaged with their heads in, fully in, their eyes, their ears, their mouth, their mind. They're engaged in the discussions that are there, and they are intensely involved in the shaping of the policies and helping, working with the pastor in the missional strategy that's necessary. But they're not involved in the daily operations. of the board. And moving to, I want to say a governance model, but moving to a model where boards see the primary responsibility as establishing policy by which the church will operate, by which the pastor and the team will function, and then leaving, once those policies are adopted, the implementation of those policies to the board, to the pastor, and to the staff, leaving that to, if you will, the pastor and his staff. It may be we'll join them on a Saturday, on a work day, landscaping, whatever it may be, but more and more to see the role on Tuesday night, if you will, the board meeting, whenever it is called, as increasingly asking what policy is needed to guide us in this area. We just recently were working with Compassionate Ministry. We had a gift, a sizable gift given to the church for Compassionate Ministries. And so at one point we're asking, we'll make those decisions, or leaving either up to the pastor or staff, or just on a one-to-one basis as these needs arise. And I asked the question a couple of months ago, let's establish a policy on compassionate ministry giving, and then let that policy guide the staff, the pastor. For sure, there may be exceptions, and there may be exceptions to the rule, but you have a policy statement to guide. We don't have to bring, are we going to pay $10 for two McDonald's gift cards or something like that? No, you have a policy to guide the pastor and staff in those questions, and that is what we mean. More specifically, when we talk about healthy boards, let's go back. When we talk about healthy boards, we again talk about head in, fingers out. It really means that boards increasingly focus on policy formulation, and mission strategy, and not just the daily operations or which color of the paint we're going to use or of the carpet. There may be policies to guide, and there may obviously be discussions before those policies are adopted, but you work toward establishing that policy and leaving the implementation to the pastor and staff. When we talk about a governing board, we use that word particularly in schools, organizations, in colleges and universities. But I also coming to see it's very true really of a local church board, where the local church board oversees the mission of the church, and senses a responsibility for the mission, just not on the pastor's shoulder to articulate it and to quote it and to believe it and to live it, but they oversee the mission. They develop a shared vision of the school. The governing board shapes the future of the organization, and really ensures accountability. And that accountability is really to the government. Why else do we want audits for our financial reports? For sure, there is that accountability to the government, for the moral owners, our membership, and really accountability for the leaders, as much to protect the leader from himself or others, but to be that transparent accountability, the leader being transparent to the ownership, the moral owners, the membership of the church, through appropriate reviews in a timely manner. So I'm aware, very much aware, that in you're very much aware that in the Church of the Nazarene we have defined in our manual that structure, and you know that I put this up because I think it is important. You know this, I don't even have to repeat it for you. But what I found, even in our church in Tampa, with certain situations and with the recommendation of the pastor, oftentimes the manual provides for the district superintendent to work with churches to break out of this particular mold and go in a way that's really beneficial to that local church. Of course, it has to be with the approval of the district superintendent. But I think it's very, very important that we start with our manual, but not necessarily be limited if we feel like there are some ways and means by which we can be strengthened. I know in our church, the pastor who was at Tampa First before he moved to this region, had asked the district superintendent, for the sake of some diversity on our board, because of the diverse community we're in, ask for an appointment of local church members who represented that diversity to be a part of the board. And the district superintendent showed me a letter that he replied to the pastor and approved that recommendation. And so we work within that structure, but it's a starting point for us, and we have some flexibility under the guidance and the directorship of our district superintendents. I talk in terms of 4 modes of thinking regarding the board. There are 4 modes of thinking, and you know these 4 modes. Let me just refer to them briefly. I think you know the fiduciary responsibility. We're probably most aware of fiduciary responsibility when it comes to financial and the legal responsibilities that we may have. We turn in certain books as requested to the government to make sure that we're operating within the standards that are required by the state or by the city of fiduciary responsibility. The word fiduciary, I think you know, implies that you as a board are stewards of the tangible assets of the church. Fiduciary responsibility includes the legal and the financial integrity of your church. I think fiduciary responsibility includes developing the policies and the value statements, the priorities, and approve the programs that are consistent with the church's mission and vision and the values and the priorities. Fiduciary, a key word. A board has much more responsibilities than just a fiduciary, but we can't overlook that one. The second mode of thinking on a board, on a strong and effective board, on a healthy board, I believe, is that of strategic mode of thinking, where the board works in conjunction with the pastor and becomes really a planning partner with the pastor. And that planning partnership is good for the church. It involves that pastor who may be new, maybe in place for a number of years, but with the board, some of whom are new and some of whom have been there a long time, but with taking the time necessary to really to find not just a vision for the future that's embraced by the pastor, but a vision of the future that's owned by the congregation through the board, who then the board the other day in Tampa was talking about something and it involved fundraising and something required. Well, a roof or something. I think it was a roof actually. And they asked me, "Have you had experience in fundraising?" And I said, "Well, yes, I have. I've had experience in fundraising." Well, and they were really happy with that. I said, "But if you're asking me, will I be the one to stand in front of the church and present this problem? The answer is no. I will not do that. I will support you. I'll be right behind you. But one of you from the board will be the one to represent the board and the congregation, because they'll listen to you. I'm the new person on the block." But I said, "I'm not trying to escape it. There are millions of dollars involved. Terry, you're at a university. You understand those projects." But no. And I think that strategic, that planning partner with the pastor is so very, very important. the next, what I try to say is that these modes of thinking are more circular in nature. They're modes of thinking that are continuous, as in a cycle. It's not just 1, 2, 3, and 4. It can intervene in whatever the issue is, according it could be at that particular point. Fiduciary, we talked about. Strategic, we've talked about. Representative, one I would assume and believe that you're very familiar with. That is a mode of thinking on the board that is representative. We represent, or we are here to make sure that a pastor doesn't stray or money is not spent inappropriately. But the comments from that person who thinks primarily in that representative mode is rooted in the church's history and traditions and the perceived beliefs. And there's for sure nothing wrong with that. I would like to think that all of us, particularly as pastors, have that hat on or embrace that representative mode. Here's the issue. If everyone on the board only thinks in terms of representative as a mode of thinking, something else suffers. And so we don't want to downplay that part, but to expand a way of thinking. Even to the point of reframing as a mode of thinking. Fiduciary, strategic, representative, reframing. Reframing mode of thinking is that ability, that way of thinking that connects the dots regarding problems or issues before the board. The big questions are reframed or visualized so that the real issue being discussed is really the big question before us. Dr. Toller, we were around the board at Global Ministry Center. The general superintendents were there, directors. I forget the issue, but I remember one of your colleagues, and I think you were together on this, raised this as, what is the real issue here? Because what we were discussing was one thing, but the question emerged was, what is the real issue we're talking about? And what the real issue before us was not specifically the question being addressed. And that ability to connect dots to, I call it reframing. A good book by, I think it's James Chait, on leadership as governance. It talks about this in a different way, uses different terms even, but he's helped me think through that important role. Here's the question, here's the issue for me. Not all of us, as gifted as we are, not all of us are strong, equally strong in these 4 areas. But when I'm continually pestered by a question from a board member who just asks continual questions, either about finances or could be a legal issue, or even somebody who says, who's always thinking down 5 years, we're not talking about 5 years from now, we're talking about right now. But that strategic person, a person who just built into thinking, training, all work even, has that mindset. That's an important mindset to really, if for no other reason, say, I think you're onto something, but I don't understand what you're saying. Can you talk about it and change the words even? But instead of putting them off because they are thinking differently than we are thinking as leaders, it could be to our peril at times. And try to find ways to bring out, in ways that we can understand. You can say, well, I asked the question. That's the only way I know to ask the question. No. Keep talking until we find that. Because to be able to say to someone, I think you're onto something, I just don't quite understand it yet. Let's keep talking. Let's keep talking. Can anybody else help me? Help me. And to think that board functions really at its best when these 4 are not all encapsulated in one person, even the leader, but that leader recognizing all 4 modes of thinking, all 4 are important, and really seeks to locate those who just inevitably almost gets under our skin by asking those kinds of questions. But you know down deep, that really is a good question. It's not my question. I want to go on to my question and more my issues. But so very important. Some of you have read the books of Max Dupree, great lay leader, CEO, Fortune 500, retired now, retired president, CEO of a large Fortune 500 company. Great Christian leader, chair of a number of large university, Christian university and our seminary, Fuller Seminary at one time, board. But in a meeting with Council for Christian Colleges and Universities one time said, the first responsibility of the leader is to define reality. And perhaps you've heard that before, and you've heard perhaps him speaking, you've heard it quoted. But I said to our board at Tampa First earlier this year, really, the first responsibility of a board is to define reality. Really, not to just live in the past and to tell everybody the way it was back when this person was pastor, but what are the realities? And I think that really only working with data helps, and that is doing the demographic study. And you probably know this, the USA, the Global Ministry Center, there's a research office. All it takes is a phone call. They want to help us to tell our church, what do you want defined 4 miles? I want a 3-mile radius. A demographic study of our church, and I'll tell you within a few days, actually, I had more information to share from the culture, the language, the ethnicity, the finance. It was there. I don't know how do they do that. Well, they do. That's their job, and they tap into other databases. But it helped me, and when I shared that, it's not like, well, that's not true, Pastor. I mean, the data says what I use the word with our board, and I love this board. I love working. I'm learning from them. But I said when we finished our analysis of the data, both from demographics, even we had a congregational survey, and the responses came back and was sharing. One board member said, that doesn't represent our church. It was a congregational survey. You know what I'm saying? So we have to face reality. And that's why I like the quote. It's not the preacher saying that. It's a wonderful Christian brother, who's telling us what is the reality. And oftentimes reality is found in the data that will help us share. And it's uncomfortable, but it's important nevertheless. And we have instruments available. There is instruments, I'm sure, here in this local resource center for pastoral leadership on ways to help you with legal and program audits to find out where you are, even as a board. I have a survey, and I'll show you how to access this survey in a moment. But this survey I have actually asked the board to, and either once the board does this, even with the church, but this is really a church board survey, which in these areas of board and mission, board pastor relationships, member-to-member relations, board agenda, organization of the board, the function of the board, nuts and bolts. It's more than just saying we need to define reality. How do we get that? How do we really bring it? And Ian Wetson took us to, and Ian, how do we do this? Right. You go to myboardserve.org website. It'll go to this website, you'll see. And along the tabs there, you'll come to writings. And you go to writings, and he'll take you down there. I don't know how in the world he does this, but thank you, Ian, for doing this. But you'll see it says Local Church Board Survey. And here's a Local Church Board Survey that you can access. And it goes through those very categories. And it's 1 to 4 questions that the board members are asked to to complete on each of these areas, even including the board agenda, the organization of the board, the functioning of the board. And we're not going to try to read through one by one, but these are resources to help you actually define reality, even as a board and the way you function, not just people in moments of excitement or saying this or saying that, but in a thoughtful way to go through a survey, something like this. So very, very important. I do believe that it's best when boards are functioning. Their board responsibilities include these very areas, and I'll just quickly move through these because of our time. But mission and vision clarity, strategic thinking and planning, financial health, oversight, and budget approval, major gift and capital development, mission implementation and strategy and review, problem framing and sense making, organizational connectivity and networking, and property oversight and expansion, and legal standing. These are some, would not apply equally to every board, but some of these more than others are applied to you in your setting, smaller church or larger church, but these are areas that are important to us. Well, let me conclude this first section on Know the Basics by sharing with you what I shared with a board not too long ago. I asked the board to consider developing a board mission statement, a board mission statement that would help the board members see the big picture of why they do what they do, the mundane and the routine of what they go through, for what purpose. And I thought, if we could help boards shape a vision statement for themselves, for the board, it would give to them a sense of purpose, even while they're doing the routine and while they're doing the mundane. I suggested this particular vision statement, and it can be changed. There's nothing sacred in this, but it's my attempt to help a board see the big picture, that the leadership ministry, I wanted the board to see their role as a leadership role, as a leadership ministry. The leadership ministry of our church board enables the church attendees to fulfill their ministry to each other in the congregation and their mission in the neighborhood and beyond. We're not at that point of shaping a vision statement for the board where I'm serving now as interim pastor, but we're going to hopefully, we've talked about it, other things we're working on first, but more mature boards or those with whom you can, I would encourage you to shape and what you find out, send through the resource center here so we can begin to collect some samples or models, examples of board vision statements that actually give to the board members that big picture of why they do what they do, so that in the routine, just the monotonous at times work, they see the bigger picture and how these dots, in fact, are being connected to a larger whole. Well, we'll take a break in 15 minutes, but I'd like to see if I could work through the second of these non-negotiables, what I call ask the right questions. Just ask the right questions. What I have really thought about, how do we shape a board in such a way that we nurture a culture, and culture doesn't take shape easy, but nurture a culture of asking mission-driven and sustainability questions. I have to tell you, years ago, I asked the Lord to give me the gift of asking the right questions. whether it's a one-on-one counseling, whether it's in a teaching responsibility, a leadership role, at whatever level. I wanted to develop the art and science of asking good questions, the right questions. When we talk about questions in the church, I just go through several of these questions. Questions such as, what is the most critical issue or major concern facing the church, facing us as a board? Another good question that this second question is better asked sooner rather than later, that what legal documents need to be reviewed at least annually? You know, you don't need those legal documents reviewed until you need them. And when you need them, you really need them. Amen? Really? And increasingly with government encroachment from Christian universities to local churches, it's good to have our documents in order. A little more about that, I think, later. But what legal documents need to be reviewed annually? What 3 big ideas should the church board focus on during the next 3 years? Again, these are not carpet questions. These are not paint questions. These are big questions, right questions for us. The next question, and really, I told you earlier that we built our spring board retreat around this whole particular point of asking the right question. The board retreat was built around the question, around the theme of big questions. But these questions I'm sharing here were questions we asked, and really, probably only in maybe and it wasn't a 3-day retreat. It was Saturday morning from 9 o'clock, closed by 3 o'clock. It wasn't forever. But who are we? Not the name on the sign out front. We know that, and even by our legal documents, we know that. But what is our mission? What is our vision? What is our values? And we may have documents to tell us what those questions are. I remember as a consultant coming into Mount Vernon a number of years ago, and he was asking me in my office, and he asked me about our vision statement. And I turned around to get something off my credenza. He said, "What are you doing?" I mean, it was quite. I said, I'm getting the vision statement." He said, "Don't you have it memorized?" I said, "This is a good vision statement because I wrote it." I told him that. He was not impressed. He was not impressed. He said, "Leave it there. I don't even want to see it." And he talked about the importance that about personalizing, knowing it, making it at least succinct enough so it can be memorized and known. And truth is, the next 2 semesters, I went through a process with our faculty, our staff, our students, include our trustees, and to shape that vision statement, revised vision statement. The first one still was very good. I can't remember it, but it was a very good statement. but even to this day, after we went through that process of shaping vision statement, email, conferences, different, then passed it to the board, they embraced it, they adopted it. I think to this day I can remember it. Mount Vernon Nazarene University, an academic community of faith shaping Christ-like leaders and disciples for local service and global impact. One word's missing there. But I still remember it. And after that, about every sermon I preached would take one word or something. I'd get that in there. I had cards made. People knew about signs made. But asking ourselves at Tampa First, we've just gone through a revision of this, and I don't need to bore you, share what but I could remember, last night I said, well, do I remember that statement? And I did, I quoted it last night. And but asking those questions and taking time to review them and to our values. Where are we? Not just where are we as a location, we know our address as a geographic location, but where are we on that chart? Remember the lifestyle chart? Where are we, really? That takes time. You can't just do that at an end of a meeting. That takes time. Where are we going? If we continue to do as we have done, where are we going? Well, there's another question that where could we go? Where could we go with a Spirit-inspired vision? Where could we go with a unified board? Why are we going there? What is our motivation for mission? How long will it take us to get there? What are the spiritual, the human, the financial resources needed? And how will we know when we get there? Good questions. Very good questions. The next question is likewise very important to some. We asked this one at Tampa First. We continue to ask it. What has changed significantly in the community to which the board must adjust and make appropriate transitions? I often say, I said on Sunday, our church, change is inevitable. Change in economics, demographics. Problems arise in transitions. And what has changed significantly in the community to which the board must adjust and make appropriate transitions? Good question. My brother-in-law, Dr. Lee Woolery, former retired now district superintendent of the Northeast Indiana district, said that he shared with boards with whom he worked this question almost inevitably as opportunities provided, but it was a very basic question for him. What one thing, if we do not attend to this issue soon, could create serious problems in the near future? Now, you may want to phrase that a different way, but it's getting at that reality issue of the responsibility of the board, responsibility of the leader. And when I work with churches on financial development, I even include this question: what fresh revenue generating options are available to us as we significantly increase our revenue? Well, just this last slide as a part of section number 2 is to guard the agenda. Guard the agenda. If we are not careful, we allow reports to so consume our time in our board meetings that the big questions we just talked about, if discussed at all, or toward the end of the board meeting, even after the stated adjournment time. And I've encouraged local church boards and college, university boards to, and however is appropriate and possible, but to guard the best part of your board time, like a bell curve. That top of it, where you have the most energy, you have time to deal with some of these big questions. Not so full of reports, as important that they may be, but other ways to communicate those reports to the board. But keep that board agenda so you can deal with several of these issues, talk about these big rock questions that are important, not on the way down when you're already looking at the time and you're past and you're trying to rush out. I've suggested, in addition to those pastors' report, necessary leader reports, that some have found it good to organize the board agenda in these 3 areas, items for information. As an example, I told the board last board meeting I leave for Oklahoma City, the airport on my flight from Tampa to Oklahoma City, Sunday afternoon, yesterday. I told them the date, and I said the flight departs Tampa at 1:10. Now we live fairly close to the airport, not across town, but it means I said to them, I will need to leave the church service early. I'll preach, we'll have communion, and just a portion of the service will be remaining, but I will slip out. That was a matter of information. I wanted them to know, but it was a matter of big discussion. But you put these, you identify what those items are, you go through them quick. You don't even have to go through them. They can be first, they can be last, according to your preference. The big issue on this model of board agenda has to do with discussion, items for discussion. And these questions, big questions. and whatever that item of agenda is that is big for you, instead of just saying roof or parking lot, you put that issue in the form of a question. What is the specific question do you want discussed by the board as it relates to roof or parking lot? And the last items for discussion, items for decision. Once they've passed through that items for discussion phase, comes back after revision to items for decision in the form of recommendation. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want us to zero in on number 3, which you see is one that you're probably familiar with, that is a conflict, and to talk about communicating in conflict situations with civility.